Everyone has heard of human resources, right? But do you really know what they do? Are they ombudsman for employees? Are they a service group? What do they do? Over the years that I was a member of the workforce, I often witnessed or encountered situations that caused stress to employees or management. Situations that were often caused by misunderstanding or ignorance. Ultimately, an employee would be reported to human resources, or sometimes the employee would report a manager to human resources. The outcome was seldom what the employee expected. This article is an effort to explain why. Let's start with a definition. What is the role of human resources? The purpose of human resources is to provide structural governance in an organization, overseeing the employment cycles of members of that organization. Among the many aspects of this include hiring, implementation, maintenance, and termination of the employee. The size and depth of human resources usually corresponds to the size of the organization. The hiring aspect includes recruitment, screening, interviewing, and the drawing up of employment contracts. Implementation includes the initial introduction to the company, the introduction to benefits and policies, and orientation. There may be requirements for the new employee to attend training for material handling, safety, etc., which is usually organized by human resources. Maintenance includes payroll and administration of benefits, training on workplace policies, performance measurement, and any administrative aspect related to the employment of the individual. Examples of administrative aspects include the tracking of holidays and vacations. Employment will eventually terminate, perhaps by the employee finding another job, or retiring from the company. These are examples of self-termination. There can also be layoffs, disciplinary termination, death, etc. HR needs to process it all. The structures provided by human resources serve to standardize procedures, usually referred as company policies. They are required to optimize efficiency, but also serve to ensure that all employees adhere to a company standard, as well as a legal standard. This creates a level and consistent playing field, so that employees know what is expected of them. How does it work out? Quite well actually, most of the time. But the success of human resources is, of course, contingent on the humans running it. Over the years, I have had the pleasure of interacting with human resources in positive ways. But I have also witnessed HR failures, and I'll provide examples. But first, for any employee reading this, I want to emphasize this. Human resources is there to make the employee experience compatible with company expectations. It's important to understand that, and when you understand that human resources is there to make the employee experience compatible with company expectations, you should also understand that there will always be a bias in favor of the company. And that includes siding with management in cases of grievances, especially if the grievance is actually with a manager. Why is it okay for HR to be biased? The reasons for this are many. Primarily, the focus is on employee productivity, which contributes to the company's bottom line. If productivity is in peril, there will be a higher likelihood of attention from HR. With managers, management styles vary, and there are a great many bad managers. It is not for the employee to take their manager to task for bad management. That privilege is bestowed on the manager's boss, and yes, that can be awkward and problematic. I will be discussing this in another article. Unless the manager is overtly breaking a company policy or breaking the law, think very hard before filing a grievance. It would be better to tactfully approach your manager, ask for a spot review, and then ask for some suggestions how you can improve. At that point, you can then ask if the manager is open to suggestions that might make it easier for you to implement improvements. There is a little psychomanipulation there, but only a little bit. Do not overdo it. It is best to state one suggestion at a time and get the feel of how receptive the manager is to receiving input. Besides, you might learn something you didn't know. Does this mean to say that HR is perfect? No, but human resources is usually very good at keeping the wheels in motion and ensuring that company and legal standards are being met. There are, of course, exceptions, especially when the human resources team is understaffed. Yes, HR can have their own issues. However, it does not excuse them from being negligent, sloppy, or otherwise acting inappropriately. Let's look at some case examples. Imagine a large tech company with almost 1,000 employees. This was in Ontario. I emphasize, this example was real life. They hired a temporary worker to replace someone who was on sick leave. The manager had an established reputation for not taking criticism well. He asked the temporary worker to contact an office in the UK. The temp worker pointed out that, because of the time difference, the office was actually closed. The manager shouted at the temp worker and told her to not contradict him, just do it. She immediately complied, and confirmed that the office was closed, and that the person he needed to talk to was not available. The area manager called the temp workers agency and told them to terminate the contract immediately. Another worker, who witnessed the scene, filed a complaint with HR, indicating that the manager's behavior was brutal and embarrassing, intimidating, and unfairly punished the temp worker for what should have been a great tip. The HR department spoke briefly with the manager and closed the case. Was that fair? Well, of course it wasn't. There can be much debate on the rights of the manager, the worker, etc., but that's not what this is about. The question is, did HR respond to this properly? The answer is no. The HR people did not communicate with the employee who filed the complaint, did not contact the agency to get a statement from the temp worker, and communicated with the manager only. This is a case where a manager may have had issues in need of addressing, perhaps with training, but the issues were ignored. The employee, by the way, had information that the company was advising executives on how to illegally avert paying taxes on hefty bonuses. They got reported to government authorities. Here's another real-life case. In Ontario, employees are governed by the Employment Standards Act. This act provides the obligatory guidelines for how employees are to be treated and compensated for their work. Compensation is simple: you work and you get paid. If you work beyond a certain number of hours, you get overtime, regardless of whether you are hourly or salary paid. Unfortunately, there are many people who think that salary-paid employees are not entitled to overtime. The Employment Standards Act of Ontario says otherwise. In this real-life case, the employee complained to the manager that the time spent for on-call work was not being properly compensated. The manager argued that the on-call retainer, a fixed amount, was adequate compensation. The employee provided further information, including quotes from policies and the Employment Standards Act, and calculations to show how much money the company was alleged to be in arrears, pointing out that there is no provision in law to pay a flat rate for overtime, and requested that the manager forward this to HR for their assessment. The manager was cooperative and complied with the request. The result was that the HR department consulted an employment lawyer, who was confused with the information sent by the employee. The lawyer made a comment that on-site work did not have to be paid for people working from home by phone, and did not address the overtime issue. HR closed the case. So, was that it? Who was right? The purpose of presenting this case is not to argue whether the employee was correct or not. The point is, neither HR nor the lawyer saw fit to contact the employee and discuss the issue directly. Since HR failed to contact the employee had to consider the option of hiring a lawyer, or filing a complaint with the Ministry of Labour. I am focusing on a specific context here, so, no more details about the case. The point is to show that human resources needs to ensure that they pay attention to the actual human. Communications is essential. They should have contacted the employee to correct any confusion and, at the very least, explain their decision. Let's look at one more case. It's good for a laugh. On a personal level, I had announced my retirement to my manager about a year ahead, and provided an email reminder about 4 months later. He provided an acknowledgement and copied human resources. Within a couple of weeks of the retirement date, I had not yet heard from HR, so I sent an email seeking instruction. HR did not seem to be aware of the retirement date, or that I was retiring at all, and responded with this question: "What is your exact last day of retirement? Congrats, by the way, on a very well-deserved retirement." Now, I knew what they meant, but this is human resources, and I expected a higher standard from them. I should not have had to contact them, since they had already been notified, and they needed to be a bit more careful with their emails. This mistake was laughable, but placing the wrong word in an email or any document from HR could potentially have bad consequences. Usually, HR is very good, But, ultimately, human resources needs to maintain a personal approach with employees. An employee needs to feel as though they have value, and that means some personal interaction is mandatory. Employees who feel they have value are likely to be happier. What can human resources do to improve the employee experience? If an employee makes an inquiry, treat it seriously and provide thoughtful, educated responses. Do not let it fall through the cracks. Be proactive. Keep track of employee milestones, and make sure they get personal recognition for loyalty, at least every 5 years. Recognition gifts should be proportionately higher value for longevity. Anyone who has been with the company over 20 years should be given something decent. Do not give restaurant gift certificates unless the employee chooses that as an option. I suggest a decent thank you certificate with the employee's name on it, and a gift of their choice from a gift catalog. Recognize employees for contributions. Work with managers on this one. If an employee has a grievance, have a procedure in place for the employee to follow, and respond to the grievance respectfully. Make sure that human resource representatives are properly trained. They do not have to be lawyers, but they need to be familiar enough with regulations to know when there are non-compliant situations. Which means they must have oversight. Provide each employee with a human resources guide, explaining the role of human resources, and who to contact when they have an inquiry. Remember, human resources is there to make the employee experience compatible with company expectations, but they must proactively maintain respect for the employee, recognizing their value. I can summarize all of this thusly: you get what you give.